August 1990. I was an F-16 pilot stationed at Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina when Iraq invaded Kuwait. 26 years old, 4 years out of the Air Force Academy, finally flying combat aircraft after years of training. I joined because I wanted to fly, wanted to serve, wanted to be part of something bigger than myself. Never thought I'd actually see combat. The Cold War was ending. Berlin Wall had just come down. Everyone thought the age of major wars was over. We'd train, maintain readiness, maybe do some peacetime missions. That was the expectation. Iraq changed everything. Saddam Hussein's forces rolled into Kuwait on August 2nd, took the whole country in a matter of days. The world condemned it. President Bush drew a line. This aggression would not stand. Within days, we were mobilizing. Operation Desert Shield, they called it, defending Saudi Arabia, making sure Iraq didn't keep going south. My squadron got orders in mid-August, deploy to Saudi Arabia. Operational deployment, not an exercise. We were going to war, or at least preparing for it. The realization was strange. All those years of training, all those practice missions, suddenly it was real. We'd be flying combat sorties over hostile territory against an actual enemy with real air defenses. The deployment was massive, largest movement of U.S. forces since Vietnam. Thousands of aircraft, hundreds of thousands of troops, all flowing into Saudi Arabia through the fall of 1990. F-15, F-16, F-117 stealth fighters, A-10 Warthogs, B-52 bombers, Apache helicopters, the full weight of American air power assembling in the desert. We flew our F-16s across the Atlantic, through Europe, into Saudi Arabia. Long flights, multiple aerial refuelings, arriving exhausted and disoriented. The heat hit you immediately. August in Saudi Arabia, temperatures over 110 degrees. Dry, scorching heat that made you feel like you were being baked alive. They put us at Al-Kharj Air Base, south of Riyadh. Bare bones facility that had to be built up to handle the massive influx of aircraft and personnel. We lived in tents at first, then temporary buildings. Worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes longer. Maintained aircraft, planned missions, briefed, trained, waited. The waiting was the hardest part. We knew war was coming. The question was when. Saddam refused to withdraw from Kuwait. The UN set a deadline, January 15th, 1991. Leave Kuwait by then or face military action. Everyone knew he wouldn't leave, so we waited for January and prepared for war. The Iraqi military was formidable on paper, fourth largest army in the world. Battle-hardened from 8 years of war with Iran. Over 700,000 troops in and around Kuwait. Thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, aircraft, and air defenses, some of the most sophisticated in the world. Soviet-made SAM systems, anti-aircraft artillery, integrated radar networks. Iraq had more air defense systems than any country outside the Soviet Union. Intelligence briefings painted a grim picture. They estimated we'd lose dozens of aircraft in the first days of the war. Maybe more. The Iraqi air defense network was that good. Some estimates said we might lose 10 to 15% of our strike aircraft. Those were acceptable losses from a strategic perspective. From a pilot's perspective, they meant a lot of us weren't coming back. I wrote letters home during those months, to my parents, my sister, friends. Didn't say I was scared. Couldn't say that. Tried to sound confident, professional, ready. But I was scared. We all were. We'd trained for this, but training isn't the same as actual combat. Training doesn't shoot back. My flight commander was Major Richards. He'd flown F-4s in Vietnam, knew what combat was like. He tried to prepare us, the younger pilots who'd never seen action. Told us to trust our training, trust our wingmen, trust the mission planning. Stay focused. Don't think about the big picture, just your specific task. But he was worried, too. You could see it in his face during briefings. He knew what we were flying into, knew the statistics, knew some of us weren't coming back. Christmas 1990 in Saudi Arabia was surreal. Tried to celebrate, to maintain morale. USO shows, care packages from home, special meals. But everyone knew the January 15th deadline was approaching. 3 weeks away, 2 weeks, 1 week. The tension built daily. Mission planning intensified. Target folders grew thicker. We studied Iraqi air defenses, memorized radar coverage, learned where the threats would be, practiced strike profiles, trained for SAM evasion, rehearsed emergency procedures for when, not if, we got hit. January 15th came and went. Saddam stayed in Kuwait. President Bush authorized Operation Desert Storm. The air war would begin on January 17th at 0300 hours, Baghdad time, H hour. The moment everything we'd prepared for became real. January 16th was the longest day. We knew the war started in less than 12 hours. Knew that by morning we'd either be at war or miraculously there'd be peace. Nobody believed in miracles. I tried to sleep that afternoon. Couldn't. Just lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling, thinking about my family, about flying, about the possibility of dying. Not dramatic thoughts, just quiet acknowledgement that tomorrow I might not exist anymore, that my aircraft might be shot down, that I might eject into Iraqi territory, that I might not come home. Around 2,200 hours, we got the final brief. H hour confirmed. The air campaign would begin with strikes on Iraqi air defenses, command and control, key military installations. 500 aircraft would hit targets across Iraq in the opening hours. The largest air operation since World War II. My squadron's mission was scheduled for H plus 4 hours. We'd strike an airfield in western Iraq after the initial waves had suppressed the air defenses. Not the first wave. Those were the stealth fighters and cruise missiles. But early enough that we'd face serious opposition. Walked out to my aircraft around midnight. F-16C, tail number 298. I'd flown her dozens of times in training. Now we were going to war together. Did the pre-flight in the darkness. Checked every system twice. Loaded with air-to-ground weapons, fuel tanks, countermeasure pods. Ready to fight. Sat in the cockpit waiting for the order to start engines. Other aircraft around me, pilots doing the same. All waiting. All knowing that in a few hours everything would change. The peace we'd known our entire careers would end. We'd become combat pilots, would join the long line of airmen who'd gone to war before us. And some of us would die. That was certain. The only question was who. At 0230, we got the call. Start engines. Taxi for takeoff. The war was beginning. I pushed the throttle forward and felt the engine spool up, felt the vibration through the aircraft, felt the power, felt fear and excitement and determination all mixed together. This was it. No more waiting, no more training. This was real. We taxied to the runway, lined up, got clearance for takeoff. I pushed the throttle to full military power, felt the afterburner kick in. The acceleration pushed me back in my seat as the F-16 roared down the runway. Wheels up, climbing into the dark Arabian night, heading north toward Iraq, toward war, toward whatever fate waited for me in the skies over Baghdad. The flight north was surreal. My 4-ship formation at 25,000 feet, cruising through the darkness. Radio chatter was minimal. Just check-ins, position reports, technical communications. Professional. Calm. Like any training mission, except we were loaded with real weapons heading toward a real enemy. We could see it from 100 miles away. Baghdad. The sky over the city was lit up like nothing I'd ever seen. Tracers arcing up into the darkness. SAM launches leaving white trails. Explosions flashing. The entire Iraqi air defense network firing at the waves of aircraft hitting the city. It looked like a fireworks display from hell. We weren't going to Baghdad. Our target was H-3 airfield in western Iraq, about 200 miles from the capital. Iraqi air base with hardened aircraft shelters, surface-to-air missiles, the works. Intelligence said they had MiG-23s based there. Our job was to crater the runway, make it unusable, keep those MiGs grounded. Crossing into Iraqi airspace was a moment I'll never forget. No physical sensation, no change in the aircraft, just the knowledge that we were now over enemy territory, that the ground below us was hostile, that every radar tracking us was trying to kill us. My radar warning receiver lit up immediately. Multiple threats, SA-2S, SA-3S, SA-6S, all the Soviet-made SAM systems Iraq had in abundance. The RWR would beep and flash, showing the type and direction of each threat. You had to process it all, decide which threats were immediate, which were just tracking you, which required evasive action. Training helped. Hundreds of hours learning to interpret the RWR, to react to threats. But this was different. These weren't simulations. These were real missiles that wanted to kill me. 50 miles from the target, we started our descent. Down from 25,000 to 15,000 feet, the altimeter unwinding. H-3 appeared on my radar scope. Could see the runway, the shelters, the layout matching the intelligence photos we'd memorized. The air defense site activated. My RWR screamed. SA-6 radar had locked onto us, tracking, preparing to fire. I punched out chaff and flares, started evasive maneuvers. The formation spread out, each aircraft jinking independently to break the lock. SAM launch. I saw it from the corner of my eye. White streak rising from the ground, accelerating, guiding toward us. My wingman called it out. Another launch, then another. 3 missiles in the air. Time seemed to slow down. Every decision was critical. Pull too hard and you bleed energy, make yourself vulnerable. Not hard enough and the missile gets you. You had to read it, judge the trajectory, time your brake perfectly. I broke left and down, pulled hard, felt the G-forces crushing me into my seat. The missile corrected, still tracking, pulled harder. The G-suit inflated, forcing blood back to my brain. 7 Gs, 8. The missile couldn't match the turn rate, flew past, detonated behind me. Close enough that I saw the flash, felt the aircraft shake from the concussion. But I was alive, still flying, still in the fight. The target was ahead. We rolled in for the attack run. Pickle altitude was 10,000 feet. Had to get the bombs on target, couldn't miss. This wasn't practice. This mattered. AAA started coming up, anti-aircraft artillery. Streams of tracers rising from the ground, arcing toward us. For every tracer you could see, there were 4 rounds you couldn't. The sky filled with deadly metal. I tracked the target, refined my aim, waited for the system to give me the release cue. 11,000 feet, 10,500. The Pipper settled on the aim point. Release. The bombs came off clean. The aircraft jumped upward, suddenly lighter. I pulled up hard, breaking away from the target area. Looked back and saw the explosions. My bombs and my wingmans walking across the runway. Secondary explosions as our ordnance hit something. Fuel, munitions, couldn't tell. Just knew we'd hit the target. The formation egressed west, climbing back to altitude, running for the Saudi border. The RWR was still active, threats all around, but we were opening the distance, getting out of the engagement envelope. I did a quick check. Aircraft systems all green. No warning lights. No holes that I could see. I'd survived my first combat mission, first of many. The flight back to Saudi Arabia was quieter. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving exhaustion in its wake. My hands were shaking on the controls. Not from fear. It was over now. Just the physiological response to what I'd just been through. We landed at Al-Karj around 0600, shut down the aircraft, climbed out, stood on the ramp in the dawn light. Maintenance crews swarmed the jets, checking for damage, refueling, rearming. We'd be flying again that afternoon. The debrief took hours. Intel officers wanted every detail. What we'd seen, where the threats were, how the defenses reacted. They were building the picture, learning the Iraqi patterns, refining the next missions. All 4 aircraft from my flight had made it back. No losses, no damage beyond some scratches from shrapnel. We'd gotten lucky. The first night statistics came in later that day. Out of hundreds of sorties flown, we'd lost 1 F-15E and 1 F-18, 2 aircraft, 2 crews. Given the intensity of the defenses, the predictions of heavy losses, it was miraculous. But it wasn't over. This was just the first night. We had weeks of air campaign ahead. The Iraqis would adapt, get better at engaging us. The losses would mount. And I'd be going back up again and again until the war ended or I didn't come back. I tried to sleep that morning. Couldn't. Too much adrenaline still in my system. Too many images playing in my mind. The SAM launches, the tracers, the explosions. The moment when the missile was tracking me and I thought I might die. I'd survived. But the fear didn't go away. Knowing I had to do it again that same day and the next day and the day after. Flying into the same defenses, facing the same threats, rolling the dice over and over. They called it the air war, made it sound clean, technological, precise, smart bombs and stealth fighters and surgical strikes. The media loved that narrative. The reality was different. It was terrifying. It was chaotic. It was young pilots flying into walls of fire and hoping to survive. I joined the Air Force to fly, to serve, to be part of something important. Now I was getting what I'd wanted. Combat. The real thing. And it was nothing like I'd imagined. It was harder, more intense, more exhausting, more terrifying than any training could prepare you for. But I was a pilot. This was my job. This was what I'd trained for. So I'd rest for a few hours, eat, brief for the next mission, climb back into that cockpit, take off, fly north into Iraq, face the same threats, drop my bombs, come back alive, and do it again tomorrow, for as long as the war lasted, for as long as I survived, one mission at a time. The air war settled into a brutal routine. Fly, debrief, brief the next mission, sleep if you could, fly again. 2 sorties a day, sometimes 3, day after day, week after week. The targets changed. The first few days we hit strategic targets, command and control facilities, communication nodes, power plants, then airfields destroying the Iraqi Air Force on the ground, then SCUD missile sites in western Iraq, then Republican Guard positions in Kuwait. The targeting kept evolving based on intelligence, but the routine stayed the same. Fly north, face the defenses, drop ordnance, come home. The Iraqi Air Force didn't put up much of a fight. Some MiGs would scramble occasionally, but our F-15 would shoot them down before they could engage the strike packages. We had air superiority within the first week, complete air dominance by the second. Iraqi pilots started flying their aircraft to Iran rather than face our fighters. By late January, they'd essentially given up trying to contest the air. But the SAMS never stopped. The AAA never stopped. Every mission, you'd face surface-to-air threats. The Iraqis would turn their radars on and off, trying to surprise us. They'd move their mobile SAM systems, making them harder to target. They'd fire barrage fire over likely approach routes, filling the sky with flak and hoping to get lucky. We lost aircraft steadily. Not in huge numbers, the predictions of massive losses never materialized, but consistently. An A-10 shot down by a SAM, an F-16 hit by AAA, an F-15E that didn't come back from a night mission. Each loss was a crew someone you knew or knew of. The The Air Force community was small enough that every loss hit home. Lieutenant Morrison from my squadron went down on January 25th. SAM got him over Baghdad. We heard his Mayday call, heard him say he was ejecting. Search and rescue tried to get to him, but the defenses were too heavy. He was captured, became a POW. We saw him later on Iraqi television, beaten, giving some forced statement. It was sickening, made us all realize how easily that could be any of us. The exhaustion was cumulative. Flying combat missions is mentally draining in ways that are hard to explain. Every second in Iraqi airspace, your senses are at maximum alert, reading the instruments, scanning for threats, processing the radar warning receiver, maintaining formation, navigating, targeting, every brain cell working overtime for hours at a stretch. Then you'd land, debrief for 2 hours, brief the next mission for 2 hours, try to eat something, maybe sleep for 3 or 4 hours if you were lucky, then do it all again. Day after day. Your body never fully recovered. The fatigue built up, accumulated, dragged you down. Mistakes started happening. Guys would miss radio calls, locked into their own thoughts, would forget procedures, have to be reminded, would zone out during briefings. The squadron commander watched us carefully, looking for signs someone was too fatigued to fly. He'd ground people occasionally, forced them to rest, probably saved lives doing that. I had close calls. On January 28th, I was so focused on my target that I didn't see a SAM launch until my wingman called it out. Barely evaded it. Another time, I got fixated on a threat indicator and almost flew into another aircraft in the formation. Little mistakes that could have been fatal. The fatigue made you sloppy, and sloppy got you killed. The technology was incredible. Precision-guided munitions worked better than anyone expected. Laser-guided bombs, GPS-guided bombs, hitting targets with accuracy that would have been impossible in previous wars. The F-117 stealth fighters operated with impunity, striking high-value targets in Baghdad while remaining invisible to Iraqi radars. But technology had limits. Bad weather would shut down precision strikes. You needed clear conditions for laser guidance. Equipment would malfunction. Bombs would miss occasionally. Intelligence would be wrong about target locations. War was still war, messy and imperfect, despite all the advanced technology. The media coverage was surreal. CNN broadcasting live from Baghdad, showing our strikes in real time. Video from gun cameras showing precision hits. The whole world watching the war unfold on television. It was strange knowing that people back home were seeing this, that they were watching buildings explode while we were the ones making it happen. But what they saw on television wasn't the whole story. They saw the successful strikes, the precision hits, the surgical attacks. They didn't see the near misses, the aircraft limping home with battle damage, the pilots who didn't come back, the exhaustion and fear and constant stress. The media showed them a clean technological war. We were living something messier. February came and the air campaign intensified. We started hitting Iraqi ground forces in Kuwait directly, preparing for the eventual ground offensive. Republican Guard divisions, artillery positions, supply depots, flying close air support missions, lower altitude, more exposure to ground fire. The A-10s were incredible during this phase. Warthogs flying low and slow, tearing up Iraqi armor with their 30-millimeter cannons. They'd take hits. You'd see them land with holes in the wings, in the fuselage. But they'd keep flying. Tough aircraft flown by brave pilots doing the dirtiest, most dangerous missions. We hit the highway of death in late February. Iraqi forces retreating from Kuwait caught on the highway. Hundreds of vehicles, tanks, trucks, soldiers. We struck them for hours. It was slaughter, necessary militarily. These were enemy forces retreating to fight another day, but it was still disturbing. Seeing the destruction, the burning vehicles, knowing each one had people inside. That's when the reality of what we were doing hit hardest. In the cockpit, flying at altitude, it was abstract. You'd see the target on your display, press the pickle button, watch the bombs fall. Very clinical, very removed. But seeing the aftermath, seeing the actual destruction and death, that made it real, made you confront what precision bombing actually meant. I killed people during Desert Storm. Don't know how many. Each bomb I dropped, each target I struck, there were people there. Iraqi soldiers. Maybe conscripts who didn't want to be there. Maybe true believers in Saddam. Didn't matter. They died because I pressed a button in my cockpit 20,000 feet above them. I tried not to think about it. Tried to maintain the professional distance. They were the enemy. They'd invaded Kuwait. They'd kill me if they could. All true. But they were also human beings, and I was ending their lives from miles away without ever seeing their faces. The nightmares started in February. Not every night, but regularly enough. I'd dream about being shot down, about ejecting over Baghdad, about being captured, about SAMS tracking me that I couldn't evade, about aircraft systems failing, about dying in flames over Iraq. I'd wake up in my bunk, heart racing, covered in sweat, needing several minutes to remember where I was and that I was safe. The war was wearing us down, not breaking us. We were professionals. We'd keep flying, but grinding us down, eroding our reserves. The initial adrenaline rush of combat had faded. Now it was just exhaustion and routine and the constant low-grade terror of knowing each mission might be your last. By mid-February, I'd flown over 30 combat missions, 30 times into Iraqi airspace, 30 times facing SAMS and AAA, 30 times coming back alive. The odds were still in my favor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my luck would run out eventually. That one mission, I'd make a mistake or catch some bad luck and wouldn't come home. That thought was always there, in the back of my mind. Flying, briefing, eating, trying to sleep. The knowledge that this might be temporary, that my existence might end on the next mission. It changed how you thought about everything, made the small things matter more, made you appreciate being alive in a way you never had before. The air campaign was working. Iraqi forces were being degraded. Their command structure was in chaos. Their morale was collapsing. The ground offensive, when it came, would face an enemy that had been bombed for weeks and was in no shape to fight effectively. But that was strategic thinking. That was the big picture. At my level, in the cockpit, it was simpler. Survive today. Fly the mission. Come back alive. Do it again tomorrow. That was all any of us could focus on. The daily grind of combat, the routine of risking your life, the exhaustion of sustained operations under constant stress. One mission at a time, one day at a time, until the war ended or you didn't come back. The weather was marginal, scattered clouds at 15,000 feet, not ideal but flyable. We pushed north, crossing into Iraq around noon. The sky seemed quieter than usual, less AAA. Fewer SAM launches. I remember thinking it felt wrong, but couldn't pinpoint why. We approached the target area at 20,000 feet. My radar warning receiver showed the usual threats, SA-2 and SA-3 sites tracking us. Nothing we hadn't dealt with before. Started our descent for the attack run. The SA-6 came out of nowhere, mobile system that hadn't been there on previous missions. They'd moved it in overnight, positioned it perfectly to ambush our strike route. My RWR screamed a missile lock, then launch indication. No warning, no time to prepare. I broke hard right, punched chaff and flares. The missile was fast, tracking perfectly. I could see it in my peripheral vision. White smoke trail, accelerating, correcting for my maneuvers. Pulled harder. 7 Gs, 8. The G-suit was crushing my legs, forcing blood to my brain. but the missile stayed with me. My wingman called it. Second missile in the air. The SA-6 system fires in pairs. Now I had 2 missiles tracking me. The math wasn't good. I reversed my turn, broke left and down, dove toward the desert, accelerating, approaching the speed of sound. The first missile couldn't match the turn rate, flew past, detonated maybe 100 feet away. The blast wave hit like a physical blow. The aircraft shuddered. Warning lights illuminated across the panel, but I was still flying, still alive. The second missile corrected, still tracking. I was low now, maybe 5,000 feet above the desert, going fast. Terrain clearance warnings were screaming. I ignored them. The missile was the immediate threat. Pulled up hard. Maximum performance climb. The F-16 responded, nose pointing vertical. The missile tried to follow, but couldn't handle the sudden vertical maneuver. It passed beneath me, detonated low. I felt the explosion through the airframe. More warning lights. Master caution. Engine problem. Hydraulic issue. Something was wrong, but I was still flying, so I kept fighting. The target was ahead, but I was alone now. The formation had scattered during the missile engagement. Had to make a decision. Abort and head home with a damaged aircraft or complete the mission. Training said abort. Pride said finish it. I finished it. Rolled in on the target, tracked it through the HUD, released my bombs. Didn't wait to see the impact. Just pulled off hard and headed south, running for the border with an aircraft that might not make it. The engine instruments were showing problems. Oil pressure dropping. Exhaust gas temperature rising. The F-16 could fly on degraded systems, but not forever. I had maybe 100 miles to the Saudi border, had to make it last. My wingman rejoined on me, called out visible damage, holes in my right wing, something trailing from the tail section, probably shrapnel from those near misses. He'd stay with me, escort me home if I made it, or cover me if I had to eject. The border seemed impossibly far away, every second expecting the engine to fail, expecting to have to punch out over Iraqi territory, thinking about Morrison, about what happened to him, about being captured, beaten, paraded on television, about surviving the war only to spend months or years as a POW. The engine kept running. Temperature kept climbing, but it held together. Oil pressure was critical but sufficient. The F-16 was living up to its reputation as a tough aircraft. Taking damage and still flying. Crossed into Saudi airspace around 13:15. My wingman reported it. We were safe. I could breathe again. But I still had to land this damaged aircraft. Had to bring it down without the systems failing at the worst possible moment. Called ahead to Al-Kharj, declared an emergency. They cleared all other traffic, rolled the fire trucks, prepared for the worst. My squadron commander got on the radio. Calm, professional, talked me through the approach, reminded me of my training. Just another landing, except with battle damage and degraded systems. Final approach, gear down, flaps down. The aircraft responded sluggishly, but it responded. Lined up on the runway. 300 feet, 200, 100, flared, touched down, deployed the drag chute, rolled out, safe. Shut down the engine right there on the runway. Climbed out on shaking legs. Stood there looking at my aircraft while the fire crews surrounded it. The damage was worse than I'd thought. Holes all through the right wing. Tail section was shredded. How it had kept flying, how I'd made it back, that was luck. Pure luck. The maintenance chief inspected it later, shook his head, said I shouldn't have made it back, said the damage should have been catastrophic, said I'd used up about a lifetime's worth of luck in one mission. He was right. I'd rolled the dice and won. But knowing how close I'd come, seeing the physical evidence of how nearly I'd died, it shook me more than any previous mission. The aircraft was flyable after repairs, but I was grounded for 3 days while they patched it, and I recovered. The flight surgeon made me talk to him. Wanted to make sure I wasn't too shaken up. I told him I was fine. Lied. I was rattled worse than I wanted to admit. Lying in my bunk those 3 days, I kept replaying the mission, seeing those missiles, feeling the near misses, the warning lights, the fear that the engine would quit before I made the border. I'd survived, but the margin had been razor thin. Other guys had similar stories. Captain Williams had taken a hit from AAA that went through his canopy inches from his head. Lieutenant Parker's bomb had malfunctioned, hung on the rack, and he'd had to land with live ordnance. Captain Davis had been in a mid-air refueling when Iraqi fighters tried to bounce them. Everyone had their close call story. We'd swapped them during downtime, almost competitive about who'd come closest to dying. But it wasn't funny. Each story was someone who'd almost not made it back, someone who'd survived by luck or skill or both. And the war wasn't over. We still had missions to fly, still had to go back into Iraqi airspace, still had to face the same threats that had nearly killed us. February 24th, the ground war started. 100 hours of ground combat while we flew missions in support. Close air support for advancing units. Interdiction strikes on retreating Iraqi forces. Air cover for the coalition ground forces that were rolling through Iraqi positions with surprising ease. The air campaign had worked. 6 weeks of bombing had degraded Iraqi forces to the point where they couldn't effectively resist. They surrendered in droves. The vaunted Republican Guard crumbled. The fourth largest army in the world collapsed in days. We watched it unfold from the air, saw the long columns of Iraqi soldiers with their hands up, saw the burned-out vehicles, saw the devastation our bombing had caused. It was supposed to feel like victory. Instead, it felt hollow. All that destruction, all those dead, all those close calls and fear and exhaustion, for this, for an enemy that fell apart when actually tested. February 28th, ceasefire. The war was over. Kuwait was liberated. Iraq was defeated. We'd won. 43 days of air campaign, hundreds of missions, thousands of sorties, complete victory with minimal coalition casualties. The celebrations were muted in our squadron. We were exhausted, relieved it was over, grateful to have survived, but too tired to really celebrate, too aware of the ones who hadn't made it back, too aware of how easily any of us could have been among the casualties. I'd flown 37 combat missions, 37 times into Iraqi airspace, 37 times back. The math had worked in my favor. Others weren't as lucky. Morrison was still a POW, would be released weeks later. Others had been killed. The final tally for Air Force losses was about 40 aircraft. Small number given the scale of operations. Each one was a crew that didn't come home. My close call on February 15th stayed with me, kept replaying it, the missiles, the damage, how close I'd come. I'd survived, but the experience had changed something, made me realize how fragile survival was, how much of combat was just luck, how easily the dice could have fallen differently. But I'd made it. I was alive. The war was over. I'd done my job, flown my missions, served my country. That should have been enough. Should have been. The days after the ceasefire were strange. The adrenaline that had been sustaining us for 6 weeks just stopped. No more missions, no more threat briefings, no more flying into Iraqi airspace, just maintenance, paperwork, waiting for orders to go home. I should have felt relief, should have felt joy that I'd survived. Instead, I felt numb, empty, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off whatever had been keeping me going. The nightmares got worse. During the war, I'd been too exhausted to dream much. Now, with time to sleep, the dreams came every night. SAMs tracking me, missiles I couldn't evade, engine failures over hostile territory, ejecting into Iraq, being captured. Each night a different variation on the same theme, dying or being captured, replaying my close calls, imagining the ones that got other pilots. I'd wake up gasping, heart racing, taking several seconds to remember the war was over, that I was safe, that I'd survived. But knowing it intellectually didn't stop the dreams. We did the victory things, photos, interviews, letters home telling everyone we were okay. The media wanted stories of heroism and triumph. We gave them what they wanted, smiled for the cameras, said the right things about precision and professionalism and mission success. But with the other pilots, in private, the conversations were different. We talked about the close calls, about the fear, about how lucky we'd been, about the guys who didn't make it back, about whether any of it had really mattered. March turned into April. We were still in Saudi Arabia, still waiting for redeployment orders. The initial euphoria of victory had faded. Now it was just heat and boredom and waiting. Some guys were fine, already joking about going home, talking about reuniting with families, planning the future. Others were quieter, withdrawn, processing something they couldn't quite articulate. I was in the second group. Something felt wrong, but I couldn't identify what. The war was won. I'd survived. I'd done well. My commander had put me in for an air medal, recognition for my combat missions. Everything should have been fine. But I kept thinking about February 15th, about those missiles, about how close I'd come to dying, not just once, but throughout the entire war. 37 missions, 37 times where one mistake or one moment of bad luck could have killed me. I'd survived through a combination of skill and chance, probably more chance than I wanted to admit, and the people I'd killed. That started weighing on me more after the ceasefire. During the war, there hadn't been time to think about it. Now there was nothing but time. I'd dropped dozens of bombs, each one on a target. Each target had people. Iraqi soldiers, yes, but still people. They had families, had lives, had futures, and I'd ended them from 6 miles up, pressing a button in my cockpit. The highway of death images haunted me, miles of destroyed vehicles, thousands dead. We'd killed them while they were retreating, trying to get away. Militarily justified, they were enemy forces that could have regrouped and fought again. But it felt like slaughter, like we'd killed them after they'd already lost. I tried talking to the chaplain once, told him I was having trouble processing everything. He said it was normal, that combat affected everyone differently, that prayer and time would help. He meant well, but he hadn't been in a cockpit with missiles tracking him, hadn't pressed the button that killed people, couldn't really understand. One night in April, I was sitting outside my quarters, looking at the stars. Captain Davis found me. He'd been in the Air Force for 12 years, had flown in several conflicts, knew what combat was like. He sat down without saying anything. After a while, he spoke, said the first war was always the hardest, said the transition from peace to combat and back to peace was jarring, said it would take time to process, said some guys never fully processed it, just learned to live with it, asked if I still wanted to fly, still wanted to be a fighter pilot. I said I didn't know, the honest answer. I'd loved flying before the war. Now it was complicated. The aircraft were associated with combat, with fear, with killing. I wasn't sure I could separate the joy of flying from the trauma of war. He nodded. Said that was normal, too. Said I'd figure it out eventually. Then he left me alone with my thoughts. May 1991. We finally got orders to redeploy. Flew our aircraft back across the Atlantic, through Europe, back to Shaw Air Force Base. The reverse of our deployment 6 months earlier. Except we were different people now. Had seen combat, had survived war, were returning as combat veterans. The homecoming was overwhelming, families waiting, celebrations, parades. Everyone wanted to thank us, to celebrate the victory, to honor the returning warriors. It was genuine and heartfelt, and I couldn't connect to any of it. I went through the motions, hugged my family, smiled for pictures, said I was fine, said I was glad to be home, all true on the surface. But underneath, I felt disconnected, like there was a wall between me and everyone else. They were celebrating, and I was just numb. Civilian life was harder than I expected. The structure of deployment, the mission focus, the clear objectives, all gone. Now it was just regular peacetime flying, training missions, exercises, maintenance. The routine that had seemed boring before now felt empty. Flying didn't have the same meaning without the combat mission driving it. I'd been good at my job during the war, completed my missions, survived, even excelled. Now I was just another pilot in peacetime. The skills I'd developed in combat, the threat management, the tactical thinking, the ability to function under extreme stress, they weren't needed anymore. The nightmares continued, months after the war, still dreaming about SAMS, about being shot down, about dying in flames over Iraq. The flight surgeon said it was stress response, that it would fade with time. It didn't fade, just became part of my new normal. Bad sleep, recurring dreams, waking up with my heart racing. I started avoiding certain situations, didn't like crowds. Loud noises made me jumpy. Fireworks on the 4th of July were intolerable, too similar to AAA, to explosions. I'd make excuses not to attend celebrations. People thought I was antisocial. They were right, but not for the reasons they thought. Flying became mechanical. I'd go through the procedures, execute the maneuvers, complete the training missions, but the passion was gone. The joy I'd felt before the war, the pure love of flying, it had been replaced by something colder. Flying was now associated with fear, with combat, with coming close to death. I couldn't recapture what I'd lost. My commander noticed, called me into his office in late 1991, asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He didn't believe me, but couldn't force me to admit the truth. Asked if I wanted to talk to someone. I said no. Pride, I guess. Didn't want to admit I was struggling. Didn't want to seem weak. But I was struggling. The transition from war to peace had broken something in me. The adrenaline of combat had masked it. Now, in the quiet of peacetime, the cracks were showing. I'd survived Desert Storm, 37 combat missions, came home without physical injuries, should have been a success story, should have been able to move on, continue my career, live my life. But part of me was still over Iraq, still in that cockpit on February 15th with missiles tracking me, still seeing the destruction on the highway of death, still carrying the weight of the people I'd killed and the close calls I'd survived. I'd made it home, but I hadn't really left the war. It had come back with me, settled into my mind, taken up permanent residence. I was home, but I wasn't home. Was alive, but wasn't really living. The war was over, but for me, it would never really end. I stayed in the Air Force for 6 more years after Desert Storm, flew F-16s, did my job, maintained proficiency, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. The war had taken something from me that I couldn't get back, the pure love of flying that had driven me to become a pilot in the first place. Every flight, even routine training missions, carried echoes of combat. Banking hard in a turn would remind me of evading missiles. Flying at altitude would bring back memories of ingressing into Iraq. The feeling of releasing ordnance during training would trigger thoughts of the real bombs I'd dropped, the real targets I'd struck, the real people who'd died. I couldn't separate flying from war anymore. They were permanently linked in my mind. The nightmares persisted throughout the 90s. Not every night, but several times a week. Always variations on the same themes, missiles tracking me, aircraft systems failing, ejecting over hostile territory. Sometimes I'd dream about the damage to my aircraft on February 15th, except in the dreams the engine would fail and I'd have to punch out. Other times I'd dream about being shot down like Morrison, captured, beaten. The dreams were vivid enough that I'd wake up disoriented, needing several seconds to remember where I was. My wife, I'd married in 1993, learned to recognize when I was having nightmares. She'd wake me gently, ground me back in reality, but it put strain on the marriage. Hard to maintain intimacy when your partner is regularly waking up terrified, reliving a war from years ago. I tried therapy through the VA in the late 90s, PTSD treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy. They helped me understand what was happening, that combat had rewired my brain, created associations and responses that wouldn't just disappear, that the nightmares and anxiety and hypervigilance were normal reactions to abnormal experiences. Understanding it didn't make it go away, just gave me vocabulary for what I was experiencing, made it slightly easier to cope with, but not to overcome. I left the Air Force in 1997, made captain, had a decent career, but couldn't see myself staying for 20 years. The military felt different after the war. The camaraderie was still there, the professionalism, the mission, but I felt disconnected from it, like I was going through the motions without really being present. Transitioning to civilian life was difficult. I got a job with an aerospace contractor using my military experience in a civilian context. The work was fine, the pay was good, but it felt hollow. I was just filling time, going through the routine, existing without really living. The Desert Storm reunions started in the late 90s. Veterans gathering to commemorate the war, to reconnect, to remember. I went to a few. Saw guys from my squadron, people I'd flown with. We'd share stories, talk about what we'd been doing since the war, try to recapture some of the bond we'd felt during combat. But the reunions were bittersweet. We'd all changed. The war had affected each of us differently. Some seemed fine, had moved on, integrated their combat experience into their lives and continued forward. Others were struggling like me, carrying visible and invisible scars. And we'd all aged, moved on to different lives, different priorities. The shared experience of Desert Storm was our connection, but it wasn't enough to bridge the years and distance. One reunion, I talked with a guy who'd been an A-10 pilot. He'd flown close air support missions, low and slow over Iraqi positions, taking ground fire constantly. Lost part of his hearing from all the close-range explosions. He said he couldn't sleep without noise anymore. The silence reminded him too much of the moments before enemy fire would erupt. Different symptoms, same underlying issue. The war had changed us in ways we were still discovering years later. My marriage ended in 2003. Not dramatically, just slowly fell apart. The distance I'd maintained since the war, the emotional walls I'd built, the inability to fully connect, it wore her down. She tried to understand, tried to be patient, but eventually she had to prioritize her own well-being. I didn't blame her. Wasn't sure I'd have stayed either if the roles were reversed. The second Iraq war started that same year. Watching it unfold on television was surreal. Seeing aircraft flying missions over Iraq, striking targets, dealing with the same threats we'd faced in 1991. Except this time, it was more controversial, more complex, more protracted. Desert Storm had been relatively clean. Clear aggression, international coalition, quick victory. Iraq War 2.0 was messier. I found myself having strong reactions to the coverage. Would get angry at the sanitized reporting, at the way they made it look clean and precise and bloodless. Would get anxious watching gun camera footage, reliving my own combat missions. Had to stop watching the news entirely for a while. Too triggering. Too many memories. Some of the guys I'd flown with in Desert Storm were back over Iraq, flying in the new war. Older now, more experienced, but still putting their lives on the line. I felt guilty that I wasn't there with them, felt like I'd abandoned something by getting out. But I also knew I couldn't have done it again, couldn't have gone back to combat. The first war had used up whatever reserve of courage or resilience I'd had. The years passed. 2010s came. I was in my 50s, working, living alone, managing my PTSD symptoms with varying degrees of success. The nightmares had decreased in frequency, maybe once or twice a week instead of several times. The anxiety was more manageable. The hypervigilance had dulled somewhat. Time hadn't healed the wounds, but it had made them less acute. Desert Storm's 30th anniversary was in 2021. Major commemorations, media coverage, retrospectives on the war. I watched some of it. The historical analysis, the strategic assessments, the technological discussions. They talked about precision bombing and stealth fighters and the dawn of modern warfare. All accurate, all true. But they couldn't capture what it had actually felt like. The fear, the exhaustion, the weight of killing people from miles away, the constant knowledge that each mission might be your last, the way combat changes you in ways you don't recognize until years later. They interviewed veterans. Some told heroic stories. Others were more reflective. I didn't participate, didn't want to be on camera, didn't want to try to explain something that couldn't be adequately explained. My story wasn't unique, wasn't particularly heroic. I'd done my job, survived, came home damaged. That was it. I'm 60 now, 34 years since Desert Storm. Most of my life has been lived in the shadow of those 43 days in 1991. The war defined me in ways I didn't choose and couldn't escape. It gave me purpose for a brief time, then left me searching for meaning for decades afterward. The nightmares still come occasionally. Not as often, not as intense, but they're still there. I'll still wake up sometimes feeling like I'm back in the cockpit with SAMS tracking me. Still have moments where loud noises make me flinch. Still struggle with the knowledge that I killed people, even though it was war, even though it was my job. People ask if I'm proud of my service, if Desert Storm meant something, if it was worth it. I don't know how to answer that. Militarily, it was a success. We liberated Kuwait, defeated Iraq, accomplished our objectives with minimal casualties. Politically, it demonstrated American military power, solidified alliances, reshaped Middle East dynamics. But on a personal level, I'm not sure what I gained versus what I lost. I served my country, flew combat missions, did my duty, but the cost was my peace of mind, my ability to fully engage with life, decades of carrying trauma that never completely healed. Was it worth it? The question assumes a trade-off that makes sense. But war doesn't work that way. You don't get to calculate whether the outcome justified the cost. You just survive it and spend the rest of your life dealing with the consequences. I survived Desert Storm, flew 37 combat missions, came home with an Air Medal and PTSD, built a life in the aftermath, work, marriage and divorce, relationships, routines, a life that looked normal from the outside. But I never fully left Iraq. Part of me is still over there, still in that cockpit on February 15th, still evading missiles, still wondering if I'm going to make it back. That part never came home, never will. The war ended in February 1991, but for those of us who fought it, the war never really ends. It just becomes part of who you are, part of how you see the world, part of what you carry every day. Desert Storm was called the first modern war, high-tech precision, real-time media coverage, overwhelming coalition victory, clean and quick and decisive. From the outside, maybe it looked that way. From the inside, from the cockpit, it was the same as every war. Fear and violence and death. Young people risking their lives for objectives they didn't fully understand. Killing and being killed. Surviving or not surviving based on luck as much as skill. I'm one of the ones who survived. But survival isn't the same as winning. It's just not dying. It's carrying the weight of what you did and what you saw. It's living with the consequences long after the fighting stops. 34 years later, I'm still carrying it. Still living with Desert Storm. Still defined by those 43 days in early 1991. The war is over, but it never ends. Never ends.